For us movie collectors, one of the most exciting things is getting a big box set where you get tons of films in one package. But the downside to these box sets is the price. And that leads to a question that I get asked a lot from fellow collectors. Is such and such a box set worth buying? Because they're so expensive. If you're putting down that much money, there's a higher risk of being disappointed if you don't like it. Before I give you my tips on whether these big box sets are worth it or not, I want to know what is the biggest, most expensive box set that you have in your collection. I'd love to see all the different answers, so do leave that in a comment down below. Take, for example, this one, which is really heavy. This is the Bergman Cinema box set from the Criterion collection, which I am nicely going to just balance on my shoulder. This is the biggest box set in my collection. It has about 30 films in the set. It's got a big book. There's tons of stuff in here. However, this commands a high price, a recommended retail price of $300 US. This is very expensive and a very hard thing to justify spending in one go. So tip number one is look at how much stuff you get in the box set. If this had half the amount of films that it had, then it would be a tougher sell for me. But when you work out at about 30 films, $300, that's about $10 per film. And of course with Criterion, what sweetens the deal is their regular sales, where you can get this at 50% off. It definitely becomes worth it at that price. Now, what about something like this? The Columbia Classics 4K box set, which is very shiny. This retails at about $100, pounds and euros, but this only has 6 films in the set. Now these are 4K discs, which is something to consider when factoring in the higher price, but 6 films for £100, that is a lot. But the main thing to consider with something like this is the exclusivity of the movies on these discs. These are all 4K presentations of these films which currently are not available elsewhere, and that is an important thing. It kind of sucks that we have to buy these kind of sets to get the discs we want. However, if you really want the film on 4K, then you're going to have to buy this. So that's another thing to consider. If you can only get those films in that set, then that certainly adds value to the product. Let's have a look at this one, another heavy one, the SureScope Volume 1 set from Arrow Video. You may be able to tell that this product is still sealed, which brings me on to my third point. It's only worth it to buy one of these sets if you're actually going to watch it and if you're actually interested in what is in the set. And it can't just be a passing interest. It has to be something that you really do want to sink your teeth into and get watching. This is a box set that I want to get round to, but it's been on my shelf for over a year and I still haven't mustered the courage to work through it. And I say work, it's not work. I will enjoy these films because I've been enjoying a lot of these martial arts movies lately, but don't get suckered into the potential value of a box set if you're not actually strongly interested in watching the films. You might look at something like this, or the Ingmar Bergman set, or that Columbia Classics set, but I would say sample the films before buying the set. Don't go in blind, because you may well be disappointed, or it may just sit on your shelf. Another thing to consider with these expensive sets is the packaging. Now, the packaging is not as important as the films themselves, but if you're spending hundreds of dollars or pounds on these sets, you want the packaging to actually be good and certainly not damage your discs over time. I recently spoke about the Pasolini 101 set on the channel, and while this has great discs in the set, unfortunately the packaging is very poor and may well lead to damage on your discs over time. That's because inside it has these, and these are pull-out sleeves where you have to put your fingers in and take the discs out, and it's very difficult to do. If dirt gets trapped in there, you're going to damage the discs pulling them out and putting them back in. And you have to get your dirty fingers on the underside of the disc. So you're going to have to wipe the disc before you play it. So maybe not a deal breaker for most people, but it is certainly one thing to consider when looking at whether these sets are worth it. Which brings me onto a big Blu-ray box set, one of the biggest in my collection that I have been working through lately. This is the latest of these big box sets that I have acquired. It's this. This is the Vimberts big box set from Curzon here in the UK. It has over 20 films in the set from the filmmaker and lots of extras across those discs. So let's put those purchasing tips that I have just given you to the test when looking at the Vimberts set. First of all, the number of films. You get 22 films in this set. It retails at around £200, so you're paying about £10 per film, which is not a great rate when you consider Blu-rays can go as cheap as around £6 in this country. But it's also not extortionate. It's actually, I would say, an average sort of price for buying one film. The next thing to test is the exclusivity of films that are included in the set. And I have to say a large portion of these films are not currently available on Blu-rays outside of this set. Some of Vimberts' more widely known films are available elsewhere, but his lesser known ones, his smaller, quieter films, are not going to be found anywhere else on Blu-ray. So it is a major plus to be able to have these exclusive films in this set. It's definitely a big selling point. What about that third tip of having a strong personal demand for the films in a big box set like this? Well, that's going to be down to you. I'm not here to tell you whether you should buy this one. For me, Vimberts is a filmmaker who I have a strong admiration for. I've seen many of his films, but there's about half of them in this set that I haven't seen. It's also important because when you get a big set like this, it's like an event for me. It is almost like a festival or a retrospective season at a cinema where I watch these films over a relatively short amount of time, perhaps over a few weeks or a month, and I really get a strong feeling, a strong connection to the filmmaker. Which brings us on to that last tip, having a look at the overall packaging and presentation of one of these big sets. The piece of cardboard that has all of the information about the films in the set comes nicely off, and you're left with what is a very nice display piece. It very much feels to me like a coffee table book, the likes that Taschen would produce. It has this cloth-bound texture to it, so it definitely feels like a high-end product, which is something that you would expect for that kind of price. Inside this box, all of the films are housed in this book. And if I open this up, it starts out with some writings, an introduction to Vimberts as a filmmaker. And then we begin to get onto the films. And this is something that we saw with the Pasolini set. It's housed in these sleeves. This is a major negative for me when it comes to these box sets. I know it's personal preference, but this is not the ideal solution for storing discs like this. I know that from a design standpoint, it might be the most practical way of putting these discs in a box and then shipping it out as a product. But in terms of keeping the discs easily accessible, keeping them clean, and most importantly, making sure they're not damaged over time, it's just not the best option. And then perhaps the most important thing when it comes to assessing whether a big box set is worth your money or not is the presentation of the discs. Are the films a high quality presentation? Do they look and sound the best that they can? There's always going to be risk when you buy one of these things that you'll notice inconsistencies and problems with the image or the sound, particularly in a box set that has 22 different films. There might be a varying level of quality due to different restorations done on the filmmaker's work. So to conclude with something like this, the Vimberts set from Curzon, is this worth your money? Well, like with most questions in life, it depends. It depends on how much you like the filmmaker, how much you're willing to put down to explore the works of the filmmaker. For me, this is definitely worth the money so far, but I haven't watched every film in the set, and I haven't checked out the quality of each one of those presentations, so I guess that is to be continued at a later date. For now, I think This is a very good product indeed, and if you're interested, then definitely check it out. I'll include some purchasing links in the description below if you're interested. They help support the channel at no additional cost to you. And I should point out, Curzon are doing other box sets like this from some other very important filmmakers. So I'm very eager to check those out in the future. If they're anything like this set, then I expect a very high level of quality. If you enjoyed this video, then stick around on the channel, watch the video on screen right now to get more recommendations from me. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.